ClancyPasta presents We Dared Him to Enter the Abandoned House. Written by Griffin216. For almost 25 years, I've been reliving the events of that day. I try to tell myself that we were just dumb kids doing the kind of dumb things that kids do. It could have happened to anyone. But it happened to me, and is all my fault. My best friend was Mike. We'd been friends since the time we each learned to walk. Totally inseparable. It was Mike's idea to play a prank on the new kid. Zach had moved to town a few weeks into the school year. It is never easy to make new friends, and that situation only made it harder. We knew he'd be desperate enough to do anything we told him to if we dangled friendship in front of him. So we told Zach that we thought he'd be a great fit for our horror story club. You know, like the Midnight Society from Are You Afraid of the Dark? Only there was no club. We just used it as an excuse to get him to follow us out to the old abandoned farmhouse at the edge of town. Our bikes skidded to a stop in the loose pebbles lining the side of the road. No one ever came all the way out here anymore. It was just us three kids, the old boarded-up abandoned house, and miles upon miles of untamed wilderness. Mike acted real serious as we started to tell Zach the legends associated with the house. The original owners of the house just up and vanished one night. All their possessions still in the house, and car in the driveway. They clearly hadn't skipped town. Just there one day, and gone the next. Same thing happened to the next poor family that bought the house. After that, people stopped moving in, and the county boarded up the house. It became a major attraction for kids around town. They'd sneak in and see who'd be the last one to go running from the house, knowing that every second spent in there was risking disappearance from the face of the earth. The game changed when one kid found the sigil. It was painted in dark red inside the closet of the master bedroom. Some said it was actually drawn in blood. After that was discovered, people started daring each other to enter the house alone and touch the blood sigil. That's what we dared Zach to do. "And you've each done it? Touched the thing?" he asked. Zach was practically white as a ghost already. I actually felt a little bad for him, but Mike was loving every minute of it. "Oh yeah, it's the only way to join the club. If you come back out without touching it, we'll know," Mike told him, adding, "and we'll never talk to you again." He was smiling ear to ear. Zach took another look at the house and took a deep breath. I couldn't believe he was actually going to do it. He slowly made his way to the broken piece of plywood you could slide past to sneak inside, and just like that, he was gone. Mike immediately started laughing, and I had to shove him to get him to shut up. We'd all heard the stories about this place, but we thought it was just small-town folklore. Surely none of it was true. Either way, we'd never actually been inside the house to confirm any of it. A few minutes later, Mike got a bit of karmic justice when Zach suddenly poked his head out of the hole in the plywood, giving Mike quite a jump scare. "I can't find it," Zach whined. He seemed on the verge of tears. He wanted to make new friends so bad, and was terrified if he left the house without touching that sigil, we would abandon him. Before I could tell him to just come on out, Mike turned things up a notch. "Did you complete the ritual?" he asked. Zach and I both just stared dumbfoundedly at Mike as he struggled to keep a straight face. "Zach, come on, man. Do I have to tell you everything? The sigil isn't just visible to the naked eye. Duh. You have to make an offering to be able to see it. You have to spill some blood." Mike continued and told Zach that he needed to break a mirror or find something that he could use to make a small cut. All he needed was a little bit of blood. A few drops would do it. Cut his palm, squeeze the droplets onto the floor of the closet, and the sigil would appear. It's no big deal, Zach. We've all done it, right? Mike looked to me for confirmation. I just nodded my head. Zach hesitated, thinking it through for a moment before sliding back into the house without a word. Mike immediately lost it and went to a full hysterical laughing fit. I felt bad, but I had to admit it was pretty funny seeing the poor kid so scared and yet so determined to push forward. Looking back, I feel sick about letting him go into that house. I wish the sick joke had ended right then and there. The laughter was cut short by the sound of Zach screaming from the second floor. We craned our necks, but of course couldn't see anything from outside. And just like Mike's laughter, Zach's scream was cut abruptly short. It was like someone hit the stop button on a recording. 1 second, Zach was screaming at the top of his lungs, and the next, complete and utter silence. Mike and I looked at each other, unsure of what to do. 5 minutes went by, then 15. After 30 minutes, I told Mike that we had to go in. I practically had to drag Mike through the opening. The first floor was completely empty. Mike tried to convince me that Zach found another way out and left. He was trying to trick us into believing he had disappeared, just like the families in the story. But he'd be back in school come Monday. I knew he was probably right. In fact, I hoped he was. But I needed to look upstairs in that closet before we left. That was where we told him to go find the sigil. That is where it sounded like his scream came from. It was there, right where we told him it would be. The sigil. Never in a million years did I actually believe the stories. I never knew anyone that had actually seen the stupid thing. But there it was, right before my eyes. By the look on Mike's face, I could tell he was in total shock as well. For a moment, Zach was the farthest thing from my mind. I wanted out of that house. But Mike reached out for the sigil. I lunged forward to try and pull his arm back, but it was too late. His fingertips brushed the center of the sigil on the wall, and something happened. We both screamed as the wall crumbled away and we were propelled forward through the hole. Before we knew what was happening, we were on the cold, hard floor. I spun around and looked at the closet wall. The blank, white wall. No hole, no sigil. Confused, I looked around at the rest of the room. At first, I thought it was the same, that we had just been knocked down by some force. But we both seemed to notice it at the same time. The red light coming through the windows. The windows that were no longer boarded up. We edged our way over to the window and peered out. The red light seemed to come from no direct source. It was as if you were looking through red-tinted glasses. Everywhere we could see had the same eerie red glow cast upon it. It was hard to look at it shining through the otherwise dark forest surrounding the farmhouse. "Where are we?" Mike asked. I didn't know. All I knew was that we needed to find Zach and then find a way out of here. Naturally, Mike had forgotten all about Zach. When I reminded him, he wanted to just ditch him and go home without him. I told him if he could figure out how, then I was all ears. That shut him up and we went searching for Zach. We quickly and quietly made our way room to room, but they were all just as empty as the one we started in. Mike couldn't stop staring out the windows. At first, I was annoyed that he was barely helping, but this turned out to be a stroke of luck. I rushed to Mike's side when I heard him gasp. He silently pointed down to the figure in the front yard. I had to hold back a scream as I saw it. I still don't know what to call it. At first glance, I'd have called it a man. It was deceptively tall. That was because of how hunched over it was. Most of this height was made up by its thick, muscled legs. The thing was naked, except for a cloak wrapped around its shoulders, and upon those shoulders rested an unconscious Zach. As the figure came closer to the house, I noticed more movement in my peripheral, and my eyes looked back to the edge of the woods. I could see dozens of people silently moving around the trees. Every second, they were joined by more, but none ever moved beyond the edge of the forest. They paced and grew in numbers, each of them watching the figure holding Zach approach the farmhouse. We could hear its footsteps as it entered the house and shut the door. It dropped Zach to the ground with a loud thump, which seemed to jar him awake. I could just make out the sound of his pain-filled groan. Zach was still alive. I wanted so badly to rescue him from this monster and somehow get us all home safely. I motioned for Mike to follow me out of the room. He resisted, but I dragged him along with me as silently as possible. We made our way to the top of the staircase, where we could just barely see Zach and his captor. From this vantage point, I could see the figure in much greater detail. His huge muscled lower body was mirrored in exact opposite by the sinewy skin stretched over bones, looked of someone slowly starving to death, which made up his upper body. The skin around its eyes were dark, and the eyes themselves sunken unfathomably deep into its skull. Its hair was long, greasy, and very thin. I could also see the cloak much better now that it was closer. What had at first simply looked like an old ragged and dirty cloak now was clearly something much worse. I could make out the hairs and moles throughout this homemade garment. A cloak made of human skin. The thing closed its eyes and rolled its head back, while taking in a very long and deep breath. It then let the breath back out and kneeled down next to Zach's head. It ran its fingers across his face before leaning forward and kissed him on the forehead. Zach tried to squirm and move away, but his body was already beaten and bloodied from whatever struggle had led to his capture outside. That thing then rose back to its feet and left the room. I knew if we were going to save Zach, this was our only chance. I made my move but was stopped by Mike before I had even made it 2 steps. I spun around and saw the sheer terror and anger plastered on his face. He mouthed, "What are you doing to me?" I tried to ignore him and continue down the stairs, but he pulled me back once more, and we fell to the floor. By the time I had regained my feet, the thing was back, and now stood over Zach while holding a knife. Zach groaned again as he saw the blade. He rolled over with renewed strength, a desperate bid to escape, but the thing brought its powerful leg down upon his back. I could hear bones snap and the air rush out of Zach's body. The thing then forcibly rolled him back over and drove the knife into his torso. I was frozen in fear as I watched the thing carve up Zach, slicing, cutting, and organizing various bits of the poor kid I had helped lead to this horrible place. Mike inched close to me and whispered in my ear, "We have to get out of here, now." I knew he was right, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the madness going on downstairs. I continued to watch as he cut more pieces off of Zach and, occasionally, even slid some into his mouth. When it finally finished, the thing took a seat against the wall and licked the blade clean. It kicked its head back and let out a long, throaty laugh. I finally found the strength to turn away from this monster, only to find that Mike was already gone. I could see his shadow moving around back in the master bedroom, so I quietly followed. From behind the shut door, we felt comfortable whispering as we developed our plan. Mike was adamant about just getting out of the house. He wanted to go out through the window and climb our way down to the ground where we could make a break for it. I tried to tell him that there were more things out there in the woods. Somehow he hadn't seen them. His eyes must have been glued to the one carrying Zach. Mike was scared and getting frustrated. He started to raise his voice, and I had to hush him again and again. He was mad that I kept shutting down his idea, but had nothing to offer to replace it. Eventually, we just stood in silence, neither of us knowing how to escape this nightmare. Mike returned to the window, staring out at it. He finally saw the gathering swarm of creatures out there, hundreds now, milled about the edge of the woods. I couldn't take looking at them anymore and turned away to look at anything else. My eyes fell upon the closet, the one without the sigil. And that's when it finally dawned on me. I grabbed Mike and reminded him of the sigil. We both felt like idiots for forgetting it. The sigil must have acted as some sort of portal. We reasoned that if we could recreate the sigil on this wall, then we could use it as a portal to take us back home. For at least 15 minutes, we brainstormed and argued over each and every stroke that made up the sigil. We knew it needed to be perfect in order to even stand a chance of working. The symbols that made it up were completely foreign to us, but we reasoned that between the two of our memories we could get it right. All we needed was something to draw it with. Not just anything, Mike reminded me. A pen isn't going to cut it. We have to do it in blood or it won't work. Mike wanted to just break a window and use a shard to quickly cut ourselves. How he expected to be able to do all of this silently enough to allow us to make our escape unnoticed, I have no idea. Breaking glass was out of the question. We needed a knife, and the only one we knew of belonged to our would-be murderer. We tiptoed our way back to the staircase. The thing was in the corner of the room, playing with Zach's bones like a toddler with a new set of blocks. Judging by the trail of blood, the meat it had harvested must have been carried away to the kitchen already. Lucky for us, it had left the knife laying on the ground by the discarded bits of Zach's corpse that it didn't want. Naturally, only one of us needed to risk going downstairs to retrieve the knife. Mike flat out refused. He said it was my plan, so I had to get the knife. So as quiet as I could, I made my way down the stairs, step by step, praying that I didn't hit any squeaky boards. It seemed to take ages, but I made it to the bottom. All the while, the thing giggled with delight as it tossed bones into the air and watched them fall. It created ample noise to cover any of my missteps. Before I knew it, I had my fingers wrapped around the handle of the knife. I turned and started the long journey back to the stairs. Knife in hand, I felt empowered for the first time since ending up in this horrible place. I found myself eyeing the back of that thing and wondering if it wouldn't be better to just rush forward and drive the knife into its flesh. Get some revenge for Zach. I looked to the staircase where Mike waited in red-tinted shadows and could just see his wide eyes as he shook his head back and forth. He knew exactly what I was thinking and was silently pleading with me to not move forward with my impromptu plan. But just like that, his head stopped shaking and he backed away further into the darkness. My eyes quickly darted back to the thing and found it was staring right back at me. It looked confused at first, then it let out a puff of breath in amusement and smiled at me. It brought its hand up and slowly waved at me. I rushed forward as fast as I could and stabbed the monster in the chest. For all my effort, it merely looked down at the knife plugged several inches into its skin and shook its head back and forth before launching its huge leg forward and kicking me clear across the room. I felt like every bone in my body had just been broken, but it was more from shock than actual damage. The thing removed the knife from its chest, letting it drop to the floor as it slowly walked across the room to where I landed. I slowly forced myself to my feet, just as it got within arm's reach again. I wanted to run, but I knew any movement would be met by more brute force dished out by this thing that stood before me. So I just stood there, watching it as it watched me. Our brief moment of connection broke when we heard the crash of glass breaking upstairs. The beast started up the stairs after the sound, and I was left alone once more. I fell to the ground in relief, but knew I had to act fast. The glass breaking had to be Mike's doing. I needed to help him if he stood any chance. So I rushed to where the knife fell, picked it up, and chased up the stairs after that thing. When I got to the master bedroom, I was shocked to find it empty. No monster, no Mike, but I could hear the screams outside. From the window, I could see Mike running. It was a hopeless endeavor. The thing was toying with him, practically running circles around Mike as he ran with no clear destination in mind. The figures from the woods moved with renewed vigor. I could only imagine them hoping that Mike might make it to the woods so they too could have a chance at him. Mike hadn't done it intentionally, but he had bought me all the time I needed. I ran the blade deep across my palm, and blood quickly pooled there. I got to work, dipping a finger in the blood and using it to recreate the sigil on the wall of the closet. In a few minutes I had it, and the wall began to crumble once again as the portal formed. I could hardly believe that it was actually working. I turned to take one last look out the window. If Mike wasn't too far away, I might still be able to help him. We could both still make it. But I was confronted once more by that horrible thing. It was crouched on the windowsill and held Mike's decapitated head in its hand. It let out another deep and disturbing laugh, different than last time. The pure joy of his previous laughter being replaced by menace. The creature dropped Mike's head and leapt forward from the window. He barreled right into me, and we both went flying through the portal back to my world. It had me pinned down under its powerful leg as it slowly took in every inch of the room. When it finally had a good feel for its surroundings, the creature bent down and stared right into my eyes. It patted me on the head and lifted its foot from my chest before walking out of the room. It only stopped briefly to turn around and wave to me once more before it walked down the steps and out of the farmhouse. For a while I questioned why it didn't kill me like it had Zach and Mike. But as the news started to more frequently report missing persons, I began to understand. It had been trapped there every bit as much as we had been. And I had let it out. Sparing my life must have been its way of thanking me. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed today's video. I want to give a huge thanks to all of my supporters over at Patreon and YouTube memberships. Your support makes these narrations possible, and I appreciate it a ton. If you'd like to join these lovely ghouls, you can head on over to my Patreon at patreon.com/ClancyPasta, or click the join button below to become a member. And if you'd like creepy cool shirts, make sure to head on over and check out my official merch store for some awesome tees, hoodies, stickers, and more. Alright. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a great night. Cheers.